I should have known the laughter was a warning sign. I stood in the center of my parents' sprawling living room, a place that once felt like home, but now echoed with the hollow pride of memories long spent. The chandeliers above my head refracted pale light onto the Persian rugs below, illuminating the faces of the people who had always called me the dreamer, the family who believed I was destined for nothing but disappointment. "Buy us out?" My father snorted, the sound ricocheting off the ornate walls. 13 years ago, I'd left that house with nothing but a battered suitcase and an unshakable belief in my own potential. I'd begged them for a chance, for their blessing, for anything more than the dismissive pat on the back they offered me when I told them I was dropping out of art school. They called it a tantrum, a phase, a fleeting mistake. But every brushstroke I made, every mural I painted on city walls, every late-night commission in dingy studios, it was proof of my relentless resolve. When I returned that spring day, I carried more than just paint and brushes. I carried a contract. It was crisp and immaculately printed, outlining the terms of my acquisition of the family estate. A document that, once signed, would strip them of their matriarchal home, their inherited fortune, and everything they thought they owned. The irony dripped from my fingertips each time I glanced at the lawyer's seal, each time I reminded myself that this wasn't just about money. It was about standing tall when they'd spent a lifetime telling me I'd never amount to anything. My name is Rosaline Rosie Bishop, and I'm the eldest daughter of the Bishop dynasty, at least on paper. In reality, I was always the black sheep, the anti-heir, the one who painted murals on decaying warehouses while my siblings studied finance and law. Tonight, I stood across from a half-dozen faces I barely recognized, their features hardened by surprise, resentment, and an acute lack of respect. "You think you can waltz back here with a briefcase and a grin and take everything we've built?" My mother's voice trembled, not with fear, but with furious disbelief. The silver hair pinned in a chignon quivered against her skull as she confronted me, a living testament to the legacy I was about to rewrite. I pressed my lips together and inhaled the scent of sandalwood in regret. "I'm not asking," I said softly, but firmly. "These signatures, they're already in place. You can sign tonight. Or in 30 days, the house reverts to me." Silence fell. A tangible, suffocating pause. My siblings exchanged glances that spoke volumes. Betrayal, confusion, anger. None had believed I had the means, or the legal prowess, to pull off such a maneuver. They looked at me as if I'd sprouted wings and flown back from another universe. In that moment, I remembered every whisper, every rolling eye, every stifled joke at family gatherings. I remembered the graduation they skipped. I remembered Thanksgiving dinners where they called me the artistic failure. I remembered my sister's wedding, where I was the bridesmaid who practically lived in the coat closet when the guests arrived. I'd buried that hurt under layers of paint, under cityscapes on crumbling concrete, hoping to let go. But hurt tends to linger, burrowing into your bones until you can't ignore it. Tonight, I wouldn't ignore it any longer. My lawyer, a sharp-suited woman with steel-rimmed glasses named Clara Jennings, stepped forward. "The property's title is clear, Mrs. Bishop," she said, voice measured. "The loan was repaid in full last month. The house is entirely Ms. Bishop's collateral. I'm instructed to enforce the contract if it isn't executed voluntarily by midnight." A gasp rippled through the room. My mother's eyes welled and my father's color drained. The chandelier overhead swayed almost imperceptibly, as though the house itself braced for what was coming. My younger brother, Adrian, clenched his fists at his side. I'd tried to be kind to him once, to mentor him in the artistry I cherished, but he, like all of them, had scoffed. "Is this really about the house, Rosie?" he demanded, voice taut. "Or is this some vendetta?" I met his gaze with unwavering calm. "It's about dignity, Adrian, something you've always had in abundance, but something I deserve too." I could see the struggle in his eyes, familial loyalty warring with the undeniable legal truth Clara had laid out. I'd given them enough time, months to find a way to raise the repayment funds, months to salvage their pride by facing me directly, but they chose denial. They chose laughter. I swallowed, feeling the weight of every day I'd poured into my dream. The nights spent painting murals under street lamps, the contempt from gallery owners, the solitary triumph when each piece sold. It was all for this moment, the reckoning. Time crawled as the clock on the mantel crept toward midnight. My pulse pounded in my ears. I nearly missed the taut hiss as the lawyer cleared her throat, signaling the impending deadline. My mother raised a trembling hand, voice breaking. "Rosie, please, isn't there another way?" I felt my resolve flicker for a heartbeat, memories of childhood, of soft lullabies, of the mother who once tucked me in and praised my sketches. But those days were gone, replaced by the cold reality that dreams and family legacies often clash. In the next breath, I exhaled years of sorrow and drew strength from every mural I'd painted, every boundary I'd pushed. "I'm sorry, Mom," I said, voice tight. "But it's too late." Clara lifted her pen. My mother's breath caught as she realized the gravity of the moment. I raised my eyes to the crystal chandelier one last time, feeling the hush of anticipation. Friends, family, and fortune. All of it would shift tonight. My heart hammered, and I tasted acid in my mouth as the final seconds ticked away. Then the silence shattered with the strike of 12. The moment the clock struck 12, I felt an odd sense of weightlessness, as if the entire house had taken a single, collective gasp with me. For a heartbeat, no one moved. The grandfather clock in the hallway chimed its slow, mournful toll, each strike ringing through the cavernous rooms like a countdown to exile. Clara's pen glided across the final page of the contract. Her expression was unreadable, but her eyes flicked to mine. Steady, resolute, the way a seasoned general looks at a commander before the last volley. I could feel the paper beneath my fingertips, thick and crisp, each signature a nail in the coffin of the old life that once caged me. My father sank into his armchair, a defeated king on a crumbling throne. His hand trembled as he wiped sweat from his brow. The once proud patriarch now reduced to a man grasping at a past he could no longer protect. My mother hovered behind him, her mouth moving, but no words coming out, her fingers ghosting over his shoulder like she could hold him together by touch alone. Adrian stood frozen by the fireplace, his jaw clenched so tight I could see the muscles twitch. He had always been the family's golden boy, the investment banker, the youngest to make partner at a firm none of us could pronounce. Now he looked at me as if seeing a ghost. Maybe in a way he was. The sister they'd buried in mockery had clawed her way out of the grave. Clara snapped the folder shut. The sharp clap echoed like a gunshot. She turned to me. "Rosie, it's done. They have until the end of the month to vacate. If they don't, I'll move forward with enforcement." My mother's eyes filled with tears that she tried and failed to blink away. "Rosie, please, what do you want from us?" The question punched a hole straight through my chest. What did I want? A childhood they couldn't give back? The birthday parties they missed? The graduations they skipped? The gallery shows they mocked from the safety of their country club dinners? There was nothing left to want, nothing but a clean slate. I turned to the grand windows that overlooked the back lawn. Spring was beginning to stretch its green fingers across the garden, flowers blooming where frost once reigned. The symbolism didn't escape me. I spoke without turning around. I want my peace. I want you all to see me, not as a failure, but as what I've always been capable of becoming. Adrian scoffed behind me, a bitter bark of laughter. "Congratulations then, Rosie. Enjoy your haunted palace." My head whipped toward him. "You think this is about the house? About bricks? And land?" I stepped closer, my boots thudding on the marble floor. "This was the only way you'd ever listen. The only way you'd ever look at me and know I'm not that pathetic girl you mocked at the dinner table." He didn't flinch. His eyes were glassy, but his voice was acid. "You've made your point. So what now, Queen Rosie? Are you going to kick your parents out onto the street?" Clara intervened before I could answer. "No one is being kicked onto the street, Mr. Bishop. They'll receive a fair relocation allowance per the agreement. But the property is now legally Ms. Bishop's. Any refusal to comply will result in eviction proceedings." Adrian glared at her like he could melt her with sheer disdain. I saw the lie behind his eyes, that tiny kernel of belief that somehow this wasn't real, that this was some sick bluff. I almost pitied him, almost. I left them in the living room, the weight of their disbelief pressing at my shoulders like phantom hands. Clara followed me down the hall. As we walked past the portraits of ancestors who never knew my name, I felt their painted eyes burn holes through my back. "Are you okay?" Clara asked, her voice softening for the first time since she'd taken my case. I didn't answer immediately. We stepped out into the night air, the heavy oak door creaking behind us. The lawn was bathed in moonlight, the scent of damp grass sharp in my nostrils. "I'm fine," I said finally, but my throat burned with the lie. She reached into her briefcase, handed me an envelope. "Here's the next step. Renovations, utilities, the handover of staff contracts. There's still a lot to do." I nodded absently, staring at the house. The windows were dark, save for the flicker of candlelight in the living room. Shadows of my family moved behind the curtains, silhouettes of people trapped by their own arrogance. "Thank you, Clara," I said. She squeezed my shoulder and left me standing on the stone steps. I lingered there until my breath turned to mist in the chill. I was alone now, in every sense. The bitterness of the wind settled deep in my bones. The house was mine, but the history embedded in its walls would take much longer to exorcise. I walked down the path toward the carriage house, where I'd parked my battered old Jeep, a relic from my mural painting days. The tires crunched on gravel as I leaned against the hood, staring up at the great mansion. It looked different already, smaller, more manageable, more like a canvas waiting for the first stroke of color. My phone buzzed in my pocket. A message from Clara. "We'll file the eviction notices first thing tomorrow. Stay strong for Olin." I locked my screen and let my head fall back, watching the clouds drift past a waning moon. A laugh bubbled up from my chest, sharp and startled. They'd never see it coming. How I'd transform the place, not just into a gallery, but a refuge for every underdog artist who'd ever been told they'd never be enough. My thoughts drifted to the staff. The housekeepers, the gardeners, the butlers who'd watched me grow up from behind polite smiles. They'd be the first to know what I had planned. I'd make sure they had new jobs, better ones if they wanted them. I wouldn't become my parents. I wouldn't let the house swallow me whole the way it had devoured them. The front door creaked open in the distance. I saw Adrian step out onto the porch, his figure silhouetted by the hallway lights. For a second, we just stared at each other across the dark lawn, two siblings divided by a chasm that felt as wide as the world. He shouted my name. I didn't move. "Rosie!" "This isn't over." The wind carried his words to me like a threat, but there was something brittle in his voice, something that told me the old hierarchy was dead. I pushed off the hood, got into the Jeep and let the engine rumble to life beneath me. As I pulled out of the long, winding driveway, I caught my reflection in the rear-view mirror. My face looked older, sharper, a little haunted, but behind the exhaustion, there was something else. A spark of something dangerous, something new. I drove away from the only home I'd ever known, the taste of freedom on my tongue. Ahead lay months of work, renovation plans, legal battles, and endless nights alone with my thoughts. But every mile away from that house felt like an inch closer to the woman I was becoming. I'd bought them out. Next, I'd show them what I could build from the ashes of their disbelief. And deep inside, I knew this was just the beginning. The road stretched before me, lit by the faint glow of my headlights. A canvas waiting for my brush. I woke up to sunlight streaming through the cracked blinds of my tiny downtown apartment. The air still smelled faintly of paint thinner and stale coffee, a reminder of the life I'd built far from the marble floors and velvet curtains of the Bishop estate. I swung my legs over the side of the mattress, feeling the soft ache in my shoulders from nights spent hunched over unfinished canvases. My phone buzzed again before I even reached the bathroom. Clara's text lit up the screen. "Meeting at the estate in 2 hours. Staff handover. Are you ready?" Wadi. Such a small word for something so enormous. I stared at my reflection, fingers trailing over the dark smudges under my eyes. Last night's adrenaline was gone, replaced by a quiet dread. I'd done what they never thought I could do, taken the house, secured the contracts. But now came the part they never warned you about in art school, the aftermath. An hour later, I was driving through streets I'd once painted on abandoned warehouses and crumbling brick facades. I could still see my murals peeking through layers of graffiti, swirling colors that seemed to defy the gray cityscape. It made me smile, a secret reminder that I could build something from ruin. When I pulled up the estate's long drive, the front gates were wide open. A subtle power shift. My family hadn't locked me out because they couldn't. For the first time in my life, I belonged on this land more than they did. Clara was waiting for me by the steps, flanked by two men in press suits, carrying thick folders. I recognized the older one, Mr. Alvarez, the estate's longtime head of staff. He'd been there since I was a child, polishing silver while my parents argued about tax shelters. He gave me a small, respectful nod as I approached. "Good morning, Ms. Bishop," he said, his voice warm but formal. "We've gathered the team in the ballroom." Ballroom. The word made my skin prickle. The last time I'd stood in that cavernous space was during my sister Eleanor's engagement party. I'd been 19, tipsy on cheap champagne, cornered by a distant uncle who told me I should get a real job before my parents cut me off for good. I'd laughed it off back then, not realizing that he was only half wrong. They didn't cut me off, they just never offered anything to begin with. Inside, the air was heavy with the scent of furniture polish and expensive lilies. The staff stood in a loose semicircle, eyes flicking between me and Alvarez. They looked nervous. Understandably so. Rumors must have spread like wildfire since the papers were signed. The black sheep had come home, not with tail between her legs, but with the deed in her hand. I cleared my throat, forcing my voice to stay even. "Thank you for meeting me on such short notice. I know this is a lot." No one said a word. Clara stepped forward, laying out folders on the grand piano. Each had a name embossed in gold, contracts, severance offers, references. It felt like an execution, but I told myself it was mercy. Better a clean break than forcing these people to live under the weight of my family's ruin. Alvarez stepped forward, eyes locked on mine. "Miss Bishop, Rosie, I'd like to speak for the staff. May I?" I nodded, throat dry. He turned to the group, his voice gentle but firm. "Ms. Bishop has made it clear that anyone who wishes to leave may do so with a generous package and references. No one is being forced out." He looked back at me and something softened in his eyes. "But many of us wish to stay." My heart lurched. "Stay? But the family?" "They were the Bishop name, yes," Alvarez interrupted softly, "but not the house's soul. We've seen you grow up here, Ms. Rosie. We know your heart. We know what you sacrificed to come back." A hush fell over the room. Some of the younger staff exchanged glances, hope flickering like a struck match. I hadn't expected loyalty. I'd barely expected civility. But here they were, telling me I wasn't alone in this. "Thank you," I whispered. "I want you to stay if you want to. But it won't be the same house. I plan to open it to the public. Gallery spaces, workshops, artist residencies. It'll be loud. Messy, not the museum piece it's been." A housekeeper near the back, Mary, I remembered, raised her hand. "Will there be work for us? Still?" I nodded quickly. "More than ever. We'll need docents, caretakers, coordinators. People who know the estate inside and out. You all know these halls better than anyone." Mary exchanged a look with the gardener, a wiry old man named Pete. A small smile tugged at her lips. Clara leaned in close, her voice pitched low. "You just turned your biggest liability into your greatest asset. Well done." I wanted to laugh, but my throat felt tight. I stepped forward, hands trembling. "You've all given this place more than my family ever did. You made it feel alive. I want you to be part of what comes next. If you're with me, then let's start today." I half expected more protests, but instead, Alvarez extended his hand. When our palms met, it felt like a promise sealed in old marble and new dreams. Hours passed in a blur of planning, paperwork, and hushed conversations in the servants' wing. I wandered through rooms I hadn't seen in years. The dusty library where I used to sketch in the corners. The grand dining hall that once felt cavernous and cold. Now it felt like a canvas. Everywhere I looked, I saw possibility instead of pain. At dusk, I found myself in my old bedroom. The door creaked open to reveal faded pink wallpaper and a single canopy bed, draped in sheets that smelled of lavender sachets my mother always insisted on. I sat on the edge, staring at the floorboards where I used to hide my paints and stolen bottles of cheap vodka. Adrian's voice startled me from the doorway. "So this is where the revolution begins, huh?" I looked up, exhausted. He stepped inside, hands in his pockets. He looked so much like Dad now. Sharp features, suit wrinkled from hours of pacing. But there was a vulnerability there I hadn't seen since we were kids. "I didn't expect you back so soon," I said. He shrugged, eyes flicking around the room. "Couldn't let you have the last word, could I?" I sighed. "What do you want, Adrian?" He leaned against the doorframe. "Truth? I don't know. I've spent my whole life trying to impress them, doing everything right, and they're still going to lose the house. It was never enough." I studied him, trying to reconcile the boy who'd once built blanket forts with me with the man who'd laughed when I said I'd buy them out. "You could help, you know," I said carefully. "This doesn't have to be a war. I have big plans. You have connections. Come on board, make this place something better." He let out a low laugh that wasn't entirely bitter. "You'd trust me?" "I trust you more than anyone else right now," I said honestly. "At least I know where you stand." For a moment, neither of us spoke. The last rays of sun cut through the dusty drapes, painting the room in gold and shadow. Adrian looked at me with something like regret, or maybe it was respect. "I'll think about it," he said finally. "But, Rosie, they're not going to go quietly. You know that, right?" I nodded. "Let them try." He pushed off the doorframe, pausing as he stepped into the hall. "It's good to see you here, even if it's weird as hell." When he left, I lay back on the bed, staring at the ceiling I'd once covered in glow-in-the-dark stars. I felt the ghosts of the girl I'd been, the woman I was becoming, and the battles still to come. Tomorrow, the real fight would begin. Permits, investors, contractors, none of it would be easy, and my family wouldn't give up their pride without a war. But for the first time in years, I didn't feel alone in the house, and that, I realized, was worth every signature and every sleepless night. Outside, the night wind rustled the ivy along the walls. I closed my eyes and whispered to myself, "Let them laugh, let them rage. This is mine now." And deep inside, the house seemed to whisper back. Morning found me in the grand library, sitting cross-legged on the floor with blueprints spread around me like a paper sea. I hadn't slept. Not properly. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the ghosts of my parents' disbelief, Adrian's grudging uncertainty, the flicker of loyalty in Alvarez's eyes. I saw the future layered over the past like fresh paint on rotting plaster. The house was awake too. The pipes groaned as if the walls themselves were cracking open secrets. Footsteps echoed down the halls, staff moving furniture, rolling up antique rugs, preparing rooms for architects and appraisers who would arrive by noon. It felt sacrilegious and liberating all at once. I heard the heavy click of the library door. Clara's voice broke through my thoughts. "Rosie, we need to talk numbers." She didn't sit in one of the velvet chairs by the fireplace. She lowered herself onto the floor with me, smoothing her suit skirt over her knees. A single streak of sunlight cut across her glasses, reflecting the stacks of legal files she had balanced on her lap. "Go on," I said, pulling my knees closer to my chest. My sweatpants were flecked with dried paint, last night's stress relief on a canvas that now leaned, unfinished, against the library shelves. Clara flipped through the pages. "You have enough capital to start the renovations. Barely. But if you want to open in 6 months, you'll need investors, serious ones. Artists don't like hearing that, but this is a real business now." I wanted to argue, but the bruising reality settled deep in my ribs. Art might be my soul, but money was the blood that kept dreams alive. She laid out a fresh folder. "There's an arts foundation in the city. They give grants to projects that benefit the community. I've lined up a meeting with their board next week. She hesitated. But you need to be prepared, Rosie. They'll dig into everything. Your family, your debts, your old records. A bitter laugh slipped from my lips. Let them. There's nothing they can find that I haven't already painted over in neon colors on abandoned walls. She raised an eyebrow. This isn't just about you anymore. It's about the people who want to work here, who believe in this. Don't make this harder than it has to be. I leaned back, staring up at the stained glass skylight that threw fractured rainbows across the carpet. I know. Clara touched my arm. They'll ask about your family. They'll want to know they won't cause problems. I snorted. They already are, but I'm ready. The staff's voices drifted through the cracked door. I heard Mary laughing with one of the groundskeepers. An unfamiliar sound that made my heart swell and ache at the same time. The house felt different already, like the poison was seeping out. Clara packed up her files, her business mask slipping just a fraction. I'm proud of you. I hope you know that. It hit me harder than I expected. I pulled her into a hug, feeling the rigid lines of her blazer, the steady heartbeat beneath. She pulled back first, adjusting her glasses, pretending not to notice the tear that escaped down my cheek. When she left, I stayed curled on the library floor, tracing floor plans with my fingertips. My phone buzzed with messages from local artists I'd met over the years. Graffiti kids, sculptors, street poets. People who'd seen my murals and wondered if there might be room for them, too. There would be. There had to be. A knock on the door snapped me from my thoughts. I expected Alvarez or Pete, but when the door creaked open, it was Adrian. He stood in the doorway in yesterday's wrinkled suit, sleeves rolled up, an old manila envelope tucked under his arm. Got a minute? He asked, like he was asking if I had a second for coffee, not the conversation of a lifetime. Always, I said, voice flat. I motioned him to sit. He stayed standing. He tossed the envelope onto my blueprint mess. Tax records, investment statements, all the skeletons you'll need to keep them quiet for now. I blinked at him. Why? Because they won't stop, he said, voice low. Mom's already talking about contesting the deed. Dad's too proud to ask for help, but you know what they're like. One bad headline, and you're the villain again. I stared at the envelope. So you're helping me. I'm helping myself, he said quickly, but his eyes darted away. If they burn you down, I'm next. I'm not letting that happen. I stood and crossed the room, stopping inches from him. We were the same height now, something he used to tease me about when we were kids. I want you here, Adrian, but only if you're in it for the house, not for them. He laughed bitterly. You think there's a difference? There is now, I said. You can stay. Help me fix this. Or you can go back to your corner office and pretend you never knew me. Your call. For a long moment, he just looked at me. Searching for weakness, maybe. Then he smiled, small and tired. I'm in. For now. He turned and left before I could say anything else. Hours blurred. Meetings. Walkthroughs with contractors. Alvarez giving me a tour of the hidden corners of the estate I'd forgotten existed. Old wine cellars, staff quarters, attics, stuffed with furniture draped in ghostly sheets. Every room whispered stories, both beautiful and ugly. That night, I stood in the ballroom alone. The chandeliers were dark, the parquet floors stripped bare. I could almost see my murals painted across the walls, light and color and truth, where there had once been only mirrors and glittering emptiness. I imagined the place alive with laughter and music, children's footsteps echoing instead of my mother's scolding hiss, artists splattered in paint, drunk on creation, instead of my father's business partners sipping brandy and making cruel jokes about the girl with paint under her fingernails. I closed my eyes, letting the vision bloom behind my eyelids. Rosie. My mother's voice froze me in place. I turned slowly. She stood in the archway, wrapped in her silk robe like a queen who'd wandered into enemy territory. Her eyes were sharp and damp all at once. I won't let you do this, she said, voice trembling. This house isn't yours. It's ours. I held her gaze. Not anymore. You think you can paint over a century of history with your street art? She spat. You think you can turn our name into something? Something common? My jaw clenched. This isn't about the name. It's about the people you stepped on to keep it shining. The staff. The artists. Me. She stepped closer, and for a heartbeat, she was just my mother again, her perfume a ghost from my childhood. Rosie, please, don't do this. We can find another way. We can fix this. I felt the words stick in my throat. Part of me wanted to believe her, to wrap my arms around her, to be her daughter again. But I couldn't forget the laughter when I begged for a chance, the way they'd shut the door in my face when I needed them most. I'm done fixing your mistakes, I said softly. It's time I fix mine. Her hand shot out, gripping my wrist. Her nails dug in, desperate. You'll regret this. You think you've won, but you'll never be rid of us. I looked down at her hand, then back at her eyes. I know, I whispered, but I'm not running anymore. I pulled away and walked out of the ballroom, her voice echoing behind me, a last gasp of the past clinging to the walls. Upstairs, I sat at my childhood desk and stared at the blueprints again. The house was mine. The fight was mine. And for the first time, the future felt like mine too. Outside, the moon rose over the Bishop estate, spilling silver across the cracked stone paths and the tangled gardens. In the darkness, I could almost see the outlines of what would come next. And I knew, deep in my bones, the real battle had only just begun. The sun rose the next morning behind a haze of clouds, casting the estate in a cold, washed-out light. I barely slept. When I did, I dreamed of corridors that twisted into endless loops, doors that led nowhere, my mother's voice echoing like wind through broken windows. But the dawn was real, and so was the fight ahead. I found Adrian in the kitchen at 6, already dressed in yesterday's clothes, hair sticking up in odd angles. He was nursing a mug of black coffee like it was holy water. He didn't look up when I entered, but his voice was oddly calm. Mom's packing. Dad's in denial. Thought you should know. I poured myself a cup from the same pot, ignoring the bitter taste that clung to the back of my tongue. Let them pack. Or stay. I don't care anymore. He let out a low laugh, short and sharp. You do care. That's what makes this dangerous for you. I wanted to argue, but the words died in my throat. Instead, I leaned against the marble counter, staring out the kitchen window at the back gardens. The roses were overgrown, vines creeping across the trellis like a living secret. Part of me wanted to grab pruning shears right then and there, rip out the rot by the roots. Adrian spoke again, softer now. I called the foundation, the arts grant. Put in a word for you. I turned to him, startled. Why? He shrugged, eyes fixed on the swirl of coffee in his mug. Because you're right, about all of it. And maybe I'm tired of cleaning up their messes too. It was the closest thing to an apology I'd ever get from him. I took it for what it was. The day unraveled in a blur. Contractors arrived, hard hats and clipboards in hand, measuring doorways, tapping walls, muttering about plumbing that should have been updated decades ago. Alvarez trailed behind them like a dignified ghost, answering questions about hidden staircases and fuse boxes that no blueprint could locate. By mid-afternoon, the ballroom had transformed into a makeshift war room. Swatches of paint, sketches, and rough drafts of marketing pitches littered every table. Local artists trickled in, people I'd called in the dead of night when doubt threatened to drown me. There was Mateo, whose murals once covered an entire city block before they were scrubbed clean by the same city council that now sang praises of public art. Lena, a ceramicist who had been denied gallery space because her work was too raw. They greeted me with cautious hope, a quiet respect that both humbled and terrified me. We sat cross-legged on the parquet floor, sharing takeout and scribbling notes on napkins. For the first time, the house felt alive, buzzing with the kind of energy that used to hum in my studio apartment downtown. The walls that had once felt like prison gates now held promise. In the middle of our brainstorming, Clara slipped in, phone pressed to her ear. She raised a finger, signaling for silence. Her eyes locked onto mine, sharp as ever. When she hung up, her face was unreadable. "They want a site visit," she said. "Tomorrow morning. The foundation. They want to see the space, meet you, talk to your family, if they're willing." A chill crawled up my spine. "They want to meet my parents?" I asked, voice low. "They'll want to know you're not going to be undercut by them," Clara said carefully. "They've heard the rumors, that your family's trying to find a loophole to take the house back." Mateo let out a low whistle. "They really think they can?" I shook my head. "Let them try. The contract's airtight." Clara raised an eyebrow. "Is it?" The room fell silent. I could feel every heartbeat echo off the gilded ceiling. Adrian's voice cut through the tension. "I'll handle them. They won't embarrass you tomorrow." I shot him a look. "You're sure?" He gave me that crooked grin I hadn't seen since we were kids sneaking candy from the kitchen pantry. "Leave it to me." When the artists left that night, I lingered in the ballroom alone. Moonlight spilled through the tall windows, washing the floor in silver. I walked the length of the room, fingertips grazing the walls, feeling for cracks, hidden panels, anything I hadn't seen before. In the far corner, I found a loose panel behind the velvet drapes. A tiny door, no bigger than my palm. I knelt and pried it open with trembling fingers. Inside was a box. Dusty. Heavy. I pulled it out, my breath caught in my throat. The lid creaked open to reveal bundles of letters, tied with silk ribbons gone brittle with age. At the top was one addressed to me, my name in my father's handwriting. I sank to the floor, the box balanced on my knees. The house creaked around me as if holding its breath. The letter was short. "Rosie, asterisk. If you're reading this, you've done what I thought impossible. I won't pretend to understand you. I won't pretend to forgive you for what you'll have to do to survive this place. But I do know one thing. Bishops don't quit, even when we should. Whatever you do with this house, remember, it's alive. It remembers. It will test you. If you can tame it, you deserve it. Good lucks." I sat there until dawn, the letter limp in my fingers, the words etched into the quiet places of my mind. When I finally crawled into bed, the sun was just rising behind the old oaks. I didn't dream. I didn't dare. This story took us a long time. If you like it, subscribe. Now, back to the story. The morning of the site visit arrived with an icy drizzle that clung to the estate's stone walls and muddied the gardens I dreamed of reviving. By 8, the house was a swirl of movement. Alvarez directed a small army of staff who polished the wood banisters until they gleamed like polished bronze. The smell of fresh paint and coffee permeated every hallway. I stood at the front gates, waiting. My phone buzzed endlessly in my pocket. Messages from Mateo, who was finishing a massive mural in the carriage house, from Lena, who was setting up her ceramics display in what used to be my mother's prized tea room. The old house was already transforming under my feet, piece by piece. Adrian joined me on the front steps, a paper cup of espresso in his hands. He looked tired but cleaner than I'd seen him in days, his suit pressed, hair combed back with military precision. His eyes were sharp, though, watching the long drive like he expected our parents to come storming back in with pitchforks. "Any word?" I asked. He shrugged. "They're still at the hotel, for now." A black town car appeared at the far end of the drive. My stomach flipped. Clara stepped out first, all power heels and neutral expression. Behind her were 3 people, an older man with a cane, a woman my age with a thick binder clutched to her chest, and a younger man with glasses and a skeptical frown. The Arts Foundation's decision-makers. Clara caught my eye and gave the faintest nod. I forced my shoulders back and pasted on a smile. The introductions were stiff at first. I led them through the grand foyer, pointing out the plans taped to the walls. Blueprints for the new gallery wings, the residency quarters in the east wing, the mural space in the carriage house. They murmured polite approval, but their eyes kept drifting to the corners where old water stains showed, where the floorboards creaked beneath their polished shoes. In the ballroom, Mateo was on a ladder, spraying bursts of vibrant color across the once sterile walls. The board members paused, genuinely intrigued. "Is this part of the plan?" the man with the cane asked. Mateo looked down, paint splattered and grinning. "No plan, sir. Just a promise." The woman with the binder flipped through her pages, pen tapping against the paper. "And your family is fully supportive of this? No legal claims pending?" Adrian stepped forward before I could open my mouth. "There are no claims," he said, voice calm but edged with steel. "Everything is final. My sister is the sole owner. Anyone who says otherwise is lying." Her eyes flicked to me, searching for cracks in the facade. I met her stare head-on. They laughed when I said I'd buy them out. Now they can watch me rebuild what they tried to bury. That's my promise to this community. There was a weight to my words, and I felt the house settle around me, like it approved. The site visit stretched for hours. They inspected the kitchens, the hidden servants' corridors, the cold wine cellars I wanted to convert into studios. They asked about fire codes, accessibility, parking. By the time they returned to the ballroom, my palms were raw from clenching and unclenching them at my sides. Clara stood by the French doors, watching the foundation members huddle near the piano where the contracts lay waiting. The rain had eased, sunlight breaking through the clouds in shy streaks. It made the fresh mural glow. Finally, the woman with the binder approached me. "We're not making promises yet. But this." She gestured to the house, to Mateo's colors splashed across the ballroom walls. "This is different. We'll be in touch." As they left, I felt my knees buckle. Adrian caught my elbow. "You killed it," he murmured. "Even if they say no, you showed them it's possible." I looked at him, searching for sarcasm. There was none. When they were gone, the house fell into a hush again. The artists gathered around me, one by one, carrying their pieces, their sketches, their ideas. We spread everything out on the ballroom floor. Canvases, clay, photos of old murals that had been whitewashed by the city. It looked like chaos, but to me, it was a heartbeat. We worked until the moon rose high above the estate. There were moments when I caught myself staring out the tall windows, expecting to see my parents standing in the drive, arms crossed, eyes full of the same contempt they'd worn for years. But all I saw was the night, thick with possibility. Adrian stayed late, pulling drafts and budgets apart, with a pen clenched between his teeth. Every so often, he'd glance at me like he was about to say something. Some old insult maybe, but the words never came. Instead, he just nodded when our eyes met, a silent truce forged in exhaustion. In the hallway, I found Alvarez polishing the brass door handles until they shone like gold. He looked up, his eyes crinkling with something like pride. "Your father would never have let them see the cellar," he said, almost to himself. "I'm not him," I said, and it sounded truer than ever. "No," he said, setting down his rag, "you're not." I wandered the house that night, every step echoing down hallways that once swallowed my footsteps whole. In the library, I found the old box again. I pulled out another letter, this one older. The ink faded. It wasn't from my father. It was from my grandmother, the matriarch I'd only known through black and white portraits in the study. "To whoever finds this, asterisk. This house has eaten more than it's given. But it remembers kindness. It remembers courage. If you can stand its storms, you can rebuild its bones. Good." The paper trembled in my hands. I could feel the weight of every generation pressing down on my shoulders. And for once, it didn't crush me. It grounded me. When I finally slept, I dreamed of the house alive with music, laughter, paint dripping from the walls in a riot of color, a place that didn't belong to the bishops anymore, a place that belonged to everyone who'd ever been told they were dreaming too big. At dawn, I woke to a text from Clara. "They're moving to approve the grant. Be ready." I lay there in the thin morning light, my breath coming slow and steady. For the first time, I didn't feel like a ghost in this house. I felt like its beating heart. I woke before sunrise the next morning, my body caught between exhaustion and adrenaline. The mansion creaked around me, each groan of the pipes and distant door slam, reminding me this place was no longer theirs. It was mine. And yet, the weight of that truth pressed heavy on my chest, like I was still a trespasser in my own victory. I found Adrian in the study, pacing a groove into the Persian rug. He didn't look up when I came in, his eyes were glued to the papers in his hands. Some legal brief, probably a last-ditch effort from our parents. He muttered under his breath, the words too soft to catch. "Trouble?" I asked. He flinched, then snorted. "You could say that." He tossed the papers onto the desk. "Mom hired another lawyer. She's trying to prove Dad was incompetent when he signed the transfer." I pinched the bridge of my nose. "It's airtight," Clara said. Adrian barked a short laugh. "Doesn't matter if it's airtight. They'll throw everything at you just to bleed you dry in court. That's how they win. Or think they win." I dropped into the armchair opposite him. "And you?" He met my eyes, something raw flickering there. "I'm tired, Rosie. Tired of being their golden boy. Tired of cleaning up their mess. I'm here for this, for you, until they run out of ammo." It was as close to a confession as I'd ever get. I nodded. "Good. Because today, we move forward. With or without their blessing." Outside, the first contractors arrived. Vans lined the drive, ladders banging against the sides of the house. I could hear Matteo shouting from the carriage house, his voice rising above the thrum of generators. Inside, the kitchen buzzed with staff prepping breakfast for the team. No more quiet, starched uniforms standing in corners. Alvarez had turned the old staff dining room into a command center, charts taped to the walls, checklists scrawled in looping cursive. I grabbed a mug of coffee and stood in the hallway, watching the morning unfold. For a moment, I felt the eyes of my ancestors in every portrait, watching, judging, perhaps laughing. But then Mary walked by, balancing a tray of pastries and humming under her breath, and I felt the tension slip from my shoulders. The house was alive in a way it had never been before. By midday, the ballroom was a whirlwind. Matteo's murals sprawled across the walls, a riot of color and movement that made the crystal chandeliers look absurdly delicate. Lena's ceramics lined tables near the windows, sun catching the glaze and throwing rainbows across the parquet floor. I gathered the artists and staff in a circle. "The grant board wants an official launch event. In 2 weeks. We need this place to look like a vision, not a ruin. Think we can do it?" A murmur of laughter and a few whoops rose from the group. Matteo grinned, paint smeared across his cheek. "Hell yes, boss!" "Boss?" The word startled me. Not a joke, not an insult, but a truth. For the next few days, the house was chaos incarnate. Contractors shouted instructions through the halls. Boxes of art supplies piled up in the foyer, alongside lumber, electrical wires, and donated furniture. Local volunteers trickled in, some friends of friends, others strangers who'd seen the murals going up and wanted to help. At night, I lay awake in my childhood room, the walls bare except for the glow-in-the-dark stars I'd stuck up when I was 9. I'd stare at them and let my mind run wild. Plans for the next gallery wing, dreams of workshops for kids who'd never been told they could make something beautiful. One evening, I found Adrian asleep in the library, head resting on a stack of contracts. I draped a blanket over him and watched him for a moment. This brother I'd spent so long hating. Maybe we were both tired of fighting ghosts. Clara called every morning with updates. "Your parents' lawyer is making noise, but no one's taking it seriously yet," she said once. "Keep your head down. Focus on the launch. Let me handle them." But even with Clara's calm, a knot of dread settled in my stomach. I knew my mother. I knew she wouldn't let this go. And I knew, somewhere in that sprawling house, her bitterness still lingered like stale perfume. It was a week before the launch when I found her. I'd gone up to the attic, an old habit when I needed air thick with dust and old memories. I climbed the rickety steps, flashlight bouncing off trunks and cobwebs, and there she was, standing by a stained glass window, her silhouette thin and ghost-like. She didn't turn when she spoke. "Your father built his life to keep this family safe. You're tearing it apart." I stepped closer, the floorboards creaking under my boots. "He built it to keep himself safe, and you let him bury the rest of us under his pride." She turned then, eyes hollow but sharp. "Do you think they care about you? The artists? The city? They'll use you, and when you've spent every cent, they'll leave you here alone." Her words sliced deep, but I forced myself to stand taller. I'd rather be used helping people who want to build something than stay chained to people who only know how to destroy. She stepped closer, the smell of her expensive perfume mingling with attic dust. "You'll fail, Rosie, you always do." I let her words hang between us like a curse. Then I smiled. "Maybe. But I'd rather fail on my terms than live on yours." I left her there, a ghost clutching at faded power. When I reached the bottom of the attic stairs, I felt lighter somehow, as if her poison had finally lost its grip. Back in the ballroom, the team was stringing up lights, testing projectors, marking spots for sculpture installations. The house pulsed with energy, a heartbeat that drowned out the echoes of the past. Adrian found me by the French doors, watching the dusk settle over the gardens. He handed me a glass of cheap red wine. "We're gonna pull this off, you know." I looked at him, really looked at him. This brother who'd once laughed at my paint-stained fingers. "Yeah," I said, voice soft but sure. "We are." In the distance, the wind rustled through the roses. The house creaked, shifting around us like an old dog finding a comfortable spot. I raised my glass to Adrian. "To family, the one we choose." He clinked his glass to mine, eyes brighter than I'd seen in years. "To the house that remembers." And somewhere deep inside I felt the walls whisper back. The week leading up to the launch blurred into a fever dream of paint fumes, echoing hammer blows, and hushed conversations under the massive oaks that lined the estate's drive. I was everywhere at once, on my knees, helping Matteo stencil the final layer of his mural, in the old staff quarters reviewing lease agreements for the residency rooms, in the carriage house taping down extension cords for Lena's kiln demos. The house breathed around me, each creak of its floorboards reminding me of the fragile line between past and present. Every night, I collapsed onto my childhood bed, boots still on, the glow in the dark stars overhead flickering, like distant promises. Sometimes Adrian would find me in the morning, half buried under folders and paint rags, and shove a mug of coffee into my hands before I could protest. He had become my unlikely shadow, deflecting my mother's daily phone calls, intercepting the legal threats that Clara handled with the practiced calm of someone who'd spent her life untangling the messes of powerful families. One night, 5 days before the launch, I found Alvarez in the old wine cellar, standing in the glow of a single bare bulb. He was holding an ancient ledger, the leather cover cracked and flaking. When I asked what he was doing, he turned those kind, weathered eyes on me and said, "I wanted to remember what this place used to be, so I know how to help it become what it should be." We sat on overturned crates, flipping through pages of spidery handwriting, records of wages paid to maids who had died in this house, inventories of wine stolen and never replaced, letters tucked between pages from generations of bishops who'd sworn they were doing the right thing for the family. In the flicker of the bulb, I saw it clearly. This house was more than stone and debt. It was a living thing, hungry for stories. In the days that followed, the rooms filled with new stories. Artists arrived in battered vans, lugging canvases twice their size. Volunteers from the city tacked up flyers at bus stops, word spreading faster than even Clara's press release. Curious neighbors, some of whom had never been invited past the estate gates, stopped by to peek through the wrought iron fence. And every evening, over cheap pizza and boxed wine in the grand dining hall, our little army planned how to keep the dream alive after the launch. Of course, my mother made her presence known. She showed up unannounced one afternoon, wearing the same silk robe she had the night she cornered me in the attic. Her eyes swept over the workers rolling paint on the once pristine wainscoting, the crates of folding chairs stacked in the hallway, the mural that now blazed across the ballroom walls. "It's garish," she said, her voice cutting through the hum of the drills. "It's alive," I shot back. She smiled thinly. "For now." She left without another word. Adrian found me 10 minutes later, still rooted to the spot, fury and fear warring inside me like two wild dogs. He didn't say anything, just handed me a brush and dragged me back to the ballroom, where he demanded I add my own strokes to Matteo's mural. "Put yourself in these walls," he said. "Make it yours. Make it so she can't erase you." And I did. For hours I painted. Swirls of color that carried the heartbeat I'd once buried under cracked plaster and marble facades. When I finally stepped back, sweat stinging my eyes, I realized the house no longer looked like theirs at all. The night before the launch, Clara stayed late, camped out in the library with Adrian and me. We sat cross-legged on the floor, surrounded by open boxes of grant paperwork, invoices, and city permits that still smelled of ink. "You know they're planning something, right?" Clara said, her voice softer than usual. "Your mother, the lawyer. The rumor mill is spinning out every worst-case scenario." Adrian rubbed his temples. "Let them try. The foundation's check's clear tomorrow. After that, we're too big to quietly squash." I watched the two of them, my brother, who'd once laughed when I showed him my first gallery sketch on a diner napkin, Clara, who'd bet her reputation on me when no one else would, and felt something warm unfurl in my chest. A strange, stubborn kind of hope. That night, after they both went to bed, I found myself in the garden. The roses were wild, petals scattered across the grass like spilled secrets. I knelt among the thorns, dirt under my fingernails, and whispered a promise to the house, to every ghost that lingered behind its walls. "Tomorrow you'll belong to the dreamers. I won't let them take you back." The morning of the launch dawned bright and cold. The front drive filled with cars, the gates wide open for the first time in decades. Neighbors, city officials, reporters, people who'd never cared about the Bishop estate now milled through its halls, whispering awe at the murals, the sculptures, the laughter echoing off walls that once swallowed only silence. In the ballroom, I stood under the new mural, my mural, waiting to speak. My hands shook around the note cards Clara had insisted I carry, but when I looked out at the faces around me, Matteo's paint-flecked grin, Lena's steady nod, Alvarez's patient pride, I knew the words by heart. I stepped forward, cleared my throat, the crowd quieted. My family laughed when I said I'd buy them out. They laughed when I said I'd turn this place into something more than a tomb for old money and older secrets. But here you are, here we are. And this house belongs to you now too. The applause started slow, then built like a wave crashing against old stone. I caught sight of my mother, standing near the French doors, arms crossed, eyes narrowed. But next to her, Adrian clapped until his palms were raw. The rest of the day was a blur of tours, handshakes, hushed conversations about next steps. Reporters asked me for sound bites. Kids dipped their fingers into buckets of paint in the garden workshop. Laughter rose from corners that hadn't known joy in years. At sunset, I found myself alone in the ballroom, the echoes of the day settling into the walls like fresh plaster. I sank onto the floor, my back against the mural, and let my eyes drift shut. The ghosts were still there. I could feel them, but they were quieter now. Watching, waiting. I whispered to the empty room, to my father's letter buried in a box in the library, to the house that had tested me again and again. I'm still here, and I'm not leaving. The wind rattled the windows, but this time it sounded almost like applause. The morning after the launch felt like waking up inside a dream I'd painted myself into. Sunlight poured through the ballroom's tall windows, catching on the mural's colors that were still drying in streaks. The floor was scattered with footprints, smudges of paint, empty glasses from last night's toast. It looked messy. Beautifully, defiantly messy. I wandered through the house barefoot, mug of coffee in hand. I found Matteo asleep on a bench in the garden, his jacket draped over his head. I found Lena curled up on the library couch, her sketchbook open on her chest, pencil still tucked behind her ear. Even Adrian had crashed on an old velvet settee in Dad's study, shoes kicked off, tie loosened. For the first time, the house didn't feel haunted. It felt lived in. In the kitchen, Mary was humming as she made eggs for everyone who'd stayed the night. She winked when she saw me and said, Hope you're ready, Rosie. Word's getting out. She was right. By mid-morning, the driveway was filling with people again. Reporters, curious neighbors, a busload of art students from the city who wanted to see the murals for themselves. Alvarez had to post volunteers by the gates to guide the new trickle of visitors. I found Adrian sitting on the back steps, phone pressed to his ear, voice low and urgent. When he saw me, he covered the mic. Lawyer again. They're pushing another injunction. It's nothing yet, but... I cut him off with a squeeze on his shoulder. Let Clara handle it. You did your part. He looked at me like he wanted to argue but just nodded. Weary acceptance etched in the lines around his eyes. The rest of the day blurred into a rush of impromptu tours, awkward thank yous, and endless questions about what came next. I kept my answers simple. More art. More community. More life. But as dusk settled and the crowds drifted away, a familiar dread crept back in. The bone-deep knowledge that my parents weren't done yet. I found Clara waiting in the old study, 2 folders spread open on the desk. She didn't mince words. They're threatening a full trial. It's a stall tactic. Your mother wants the press to get tired of you before you can secure your next round of funding. I sank into Dad's old leather chair. So we fight. Clara's smile was brittle. We do. But I need you to be smart about this. The more visible you are, the harder it is for them to rewrite the story. So keep the gates open. Keep the people coming. Show them this place is bigger than their name. I nodded. Done. For weeks, we did exactly that. The house transformed into a kaleidoscope of life. Artists moved in and out of the residency rooms. Volunteers weeded the overgrown gardens, planted wildflowers in beds that had once only known rigid hedges. Local kids painted murals along the carriage house walls, guided by Mateo, who swore under his breath every time the city tried to fine us for unauthorized public art. One night I found my mother in the library again. She was standing at the window, staring out at the lawn where teenagers were setting up for an outdoor poetry slam. "You're turning this place into a circus," she said without turning around. I leaned against the doorframe. Better than a mausoleum. Her reflection in the glass was sharp, almost regal in the moonlight. "You think you've won, don't you? You think this makes you better than us." I crossed the room, my boots echoing on the marble. "I don't want to be better than you. I want to be free of you." She turned then, eyes glittering. "You'll never be free of this family, no matter how many murals you paint." I stepped closer, lowering my voice so she had to lean in to hear me. "Watch me." I left her standing there, surrounded by books she'd never read, letters she'd never opened. Outside, laughter drifted up from the garden. I felt the knot in my chest loosen, just a little. The following week, the first grant check cleared. We paid the contractors, ordered new supplies, repaired windows that hadn't opened in decades. Lena's ceramics classes filled up so quickly we had to convert one of the unused parlors into a second studio. I caught Alvarez smiling as he polished the brass plaques on the front doors. Our new sign read, "The Bishop Arts Collective." It felt right. But with each small victory came another threat. A rumor that the city council was being pressured to revoke our zoning permit. Whispers that old donors to the foundation were being courted by my parents to pull their support. Every time Clara called, her voice was calm, but I could hear the tension thrumming underneath. One night, after an exhausting community meeting, Adrian found me in the garden, sitting on the edge of the old stone fountain. He handed me a folder, thin, battered, my father's crest embossed in fading gold. "What's this?" I asked. "Insurance," he said. Dad kept notes on everyone. Deals he made. Favors owed. Things that don't look so good if they come out now. I flipped through the pages. Photocopies of contracts. Scribbled notes in my father's meticulous hand. Dirt. Enough to keep certain city council members from backing out. Enough to remind people who they were dealing with. "I hate this," I whispered. "I hate that it always comes to blackmail." Adrian shrugged, his face shadowed in the moonlight. "It's not blackmail, it's survival." I looked at him. Saw the exhaustion etched in every line of his face, the hint of regret in the set of his jaw. "What happens when this runs out?" He met my eyes. "Then you do what you've always done. You keep painting, you keep building, and you make them so small that no one remembers their names. I wanted to believe him. I wanted to believe the murals, the laughter, the music echoing off these old stones would be enough. But deep down, I knew the war wasn't over. At dawn, I walked through the house alone. I touched the peeling paint in the servants' quarters, the murals' dried brushstrokes in the ballroom, the smooth banister where my father's hand once rested. The ghosts were awake, restless. I stopped by the front doors, laid my palm flat against the new brass plaque, the Bishop Arts Collective. My name, but not their legacy. A promise that this place would be more than a cage. Outside, the wind whispered through the trees, carrying the faint echo of my mother's last words. "You'll never be free of this family." I closed my eyes and whispered back, "Maybe not, but they'll never be free of me either." The house creaked around me like it agreed. I looked at him, my once perfect brother, suit rumpled, eyes bloodshot. "Then let them burn it. We'll build something better from the ashes." He laughed, a sound that almost didn't sound bitter. "God, Rosie, you never change." "Neither do they," I shot back. When he finally stumbled off to bed, I stayed there in the drizzle, watching the windows glow with the light of artists still working inside. The house was alive, louder than any ghost. The morning of the emergency hearing, I found my mother waiting for me in the study. She sat behind the desk like a queen at her throne, her hair pinned back, a smile sharp as a blade. "Sit," she said, gesturing to the chair opposite her. I stayed standing. "You can still end this," she said, voice dripping false warmth. "Sell it back to us. Walk away with your head high. You've made your point." I let the silence stretch between us until it snapped. "I didn't come here to make a point. I came here to build something you can't touch." Her eyes narrowed. "You think these artists care about you? They'll leave you the moment the money runs out." I stepped closer, hands on the back of the chair, leaning in. "Maybe, but for once in this family's cursed history, we did something real, something alive. And no matter what you do, you can't erase that." She rose, every inch of her radiating disdain. "You'll lose everything, Rosalind." I smiled then, tired but unafraid. "Not everything. Not anymore." The hearing was brutal. Clara argued every line of the contract until her voice cracked. Adrienne sat beside me, fists clenched, foot tapping out the rhythm of old family fights. I watched my parents across the aisle, their lawyer whispering in their ears, eyes flicking to me with smug little smiles. When the judge called recess, Clara pulled me into the hallway. "We're close. But they've buried us in enough paper to stall for weeks." I felt the folder in my bag. Dad's secrets. My thumb brushed the worn edge. Adrienne caught my eye. "If you're going to do it, now's the time." I took a deep breath, the house flickering in my mind. The murals, the gardens, the kids with clay on their hands, the neighbors who once thought our gates were closed forever. "Do it," I told Clara. "Leak it all." She hesitated. "Are you sure?" I looked through the glass doors at my parents. Two people who'd rather see me in ruin than ever admit I was right. "Let them drown in their own secrets," I said. Clara nodded once, already dialing her phone. When the hearing resumed, the whispers had already begun. Reporters darted in and out of the courthouse, phones buzzing with the story of old deals, shady favors, half-truths turned into headlines. I didn't look at my parents as the judge postponed their motion, the injunction crumbling under the weight of their exposed lies. Outside, Adrienne grabbed my hand. For a second, we just stood there, brother and sister, traitor and black sheep, the last of the bishops who gave a damn about anything other than their own reflection. "You did it," he said. "Not yet," I said, voice shaking with relief and fury. "But we're closer." That night the house was silent when I came home. The murals glowed in the moonlight, the garden lights flickered like stars. I sat in the ballroom alone, the echoes of the storm still rattling the windows. I whispered to the old walls, the ghosts, the family who never wanted me here. I'm still here, and I'm not done. Somewhere deep in the beams and bricks, I swear I felt it answer back. I didn't sleep the night after the hearing. I wandered the halls like a restless ghost myself, touching the cold stone walls, the smooth banister rails, the paint still drying on the murals that crawled like vines up the staircases. The house felt different now. Rawer, like it had shed one of its old skins but hadn't yet grown a new one. In the ballroom, I found Alvarez alone, staring up at the ceiling mural Mateo had finished only days before. The swirl of colors caught in the moonlight, throwing kaleidoscopes across his lined face. "I remember when your father installed these chandeliers," he said without turning. "He told me the house needed to shine so bright that no one could see its cracks." I stepped beside him. "And now?" He looked at me, a sad smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. "Now the cracks are the story, and they're beautiful." In the morning, the news broke wide open. Every outlet within shouting distance ran the same headline: Bishop family secrets exposed. Names, dates, money trails. My father's ledger had been more powerful than any painting I'd ever made. And though it made my stomach twist to see our name dragged through the mud, I knew it was the only way to keep the house safe. Clara called that afternoon. "The injunction is dead. They won't be able to afford to keep pushing this in court. Not with everyone watching now." Relief and dread tangled in my chest. "So it's over?" She hesitated. "Legally? Almost. But you know your family, Rosie. They won't vanish quietly." I hung up and found Adrian pacing in the garden, phone pressed to his ear. He ended the call as I approached, jaw tight. "They're furious," he said. "Dad's hiding in some hotel suite. Mom wants to hold a press conference to spin it all back on you." I laughed, bitter and small. "Let her. No one's buying it now." Adrian looked at me, really looked, and for a heartbeat I saw the brother I'd loved before the Bishop name had sunk its claws into us both. "I never thought you'd pull this off." "Neither did I admitted. He smiled, crooked and tired. "You ready for what's next?" I looked back at the house. The new sign out front, * the Bishop Arts Collective, gleamed in the afternoon sun. "Not even close. But we're here, right?" He bumped his shoulder against mine. "Yeah, we are." The days that followed felt like the calm after a hurricane. Neighbors stopped by with casseroles and homemade pies, as if they sensed the house needed healing too. Local artists signed on for longer residencies. The city council quietly dropped their objections. Alvarez hung new plaques in the foyer with the names of every volunteer who'd lifted a brush or hammer. The house that once belonged only to my parents' pride now belonged to everyone who'd believed in something better. One evening, I found my mother sitting alone in the library. She looked impossibly small, swallowed by Dad's old leather chair. She didn't look up when I entered. "Why are you still here?" I asked softly. She ran her fingertips along the edge of the desk, nails clicking against the wood. "This was supposed to be your father's legacy. Our legacy. And you've turned it into—" She broke off, voice trembling. "Into what?" I pressed. "Into a circus. A spectacle. A place for strangers to trample on what we built." I sank into the chair opposite her, folding my hands in my lap. "No, Mom. They're not trampling. They're saving it. They're giving it a future. Something you could never do." She looked at me then, eyes wet but hard. "Do you think they'll remember you when this falls apart? When the money dries up? You're not strong enough to keep this alive." I swallowed the old ache her words always stirred. But this time, it didn't stick in my throat. "I'm not doing this alone. I never was." She turned back to the window, staring out at the garden where kids were laughing as they dipped brushes into buckets of paint, smearing new colors onto the old stone walls. "Leave when you're ready," I said quietly. "But you don't get to poison this place anymore." She didn't answer, and when I left her there, I didn't look back. The next day, the staff found the guest suite empty. Her clothes were gone. No note. Just the faint scent of her perfume clinging to the drapes. Adrian didn't say anything about it, and neither did I. Some ghosts you had to let leave on their own. Spring came fast. The roses bloomed again, wild and untamed, crawling over the trellises that had once framed the perfect parties my mother threw for people who never really cared about us. Now those same trellises shaded children's art classes, community dinners, late-night poetry readings. One night, after the last visitor left, I walked the garden paths alone, the air thick with the smell of paint, earth, and rain. I stopped by the old fountain, its cracked marble rim covered in mosaic tiles. Volunteers had added piece by piece. Adrian joined me there, hands in his pockets, hair wind-tossed. Clara says the final ruling's in, they're out, for good. I sank onto the fountain's edge, the stone cool under my palms. So that's it. It's really ours. He sat beside me. It always was yours. We sat there in the dark, listening to the wind rustle through the rose bushes, the creak of the old oak limbs above. For the first time, I let myself feel the weight lift from my shoulders. No more hidden ledgers, no more midnight calls from Clara, no more staring down the old ghost that whispered I'd never be enough. I closed my eyes and whispered, "Thank you." "For what?" Adrian asked. "For not leaving," I said. "For standing up to them. For standing up for me." He shrugged. "You'd have done it without me. You always did." "Yeah," I said, a smile tugging at my lips. "But it's better with you here." When I finally went inside, I stopped in the ballroom. The mural glowed in the dim light. My brushstrokes, Mateo's outlines, the fingerprints of every kid who'd pressed their palms to the walls in a riot of color. I ran my hand along the painted wings, felt the ridges of dried paint under my fingertips. I thought of my father's old letter, buried in a box in the attic. "If you can tame it, you deserve it." I hadn't tamed the house. I'd let it run wild, and in that wildness I'd found myself. As I turned to leave, I caught my reflection in the ballroom's last standing mirror. For the first time, I didn't flinch from what I saw. I saw Rosaline Bishop, dreamer, fighter, builder of a home, too alive to ever die again. And somewhere in the creaking beams above, I swear the house whispered back, "Welcome home." I let the question sit between us, soft and honest. I regret not doing it sooner. His laugh was low, warm. Fair enough. That night, I walked the house alone again, each room humming with its own song. Old floorboards, new paint, whispered dreams tucked into corners. I stopped in the library, the one place that still held a piece of my parents' ghost. The box of letters was still hidden in the back shelf. I pulled it out, sifting through pages of old secrets, confessions, warnings that had shaped the walls around me. At the bottom, my father's last note, the one I'd nearly forgotten. "If you can tame it, you deserve it." I'd spent so long trying to tame the house, to bend it to my will, to make it forgive what had been done in its name. But I saw it now, clear as the sunrise that spilled through the dusty library windows. The house had never wanted to be tamed. It wanted to grow wild, roots breaking through stone, laughter echoing where silence used to reign. In the garden the next morning, I stood with the kids as we pressed the final panels of the new mural into place. My hands on theirs, color smearing our fingers, our palms flat against the rough wall. When we stepped back, the vines and wings we'd painted spread like a promise. We were here. We'd always be here. When the sun dipped below the oaks, I gathered the artists, staff, neighbors, everyone who dared to believe this place could be more than a fortress for old money and older secrets. We sat on the front lawn, paper lanterns bobbing in the breeze, laughter rising up to meet the stars. I stood then, paint still drying on my skin, the house at my back, my people at my feet. "You know how this started," I said, my voice catching as the wind tugged at my hair. They laughed when I said I'd buy them out. They laughed when I said I'd build something they couldn't break. "Well, look around you." I spread my arms wide, the house glowing behind me, the garden alive with chatter and the hum of a guitar someone had started playing by the fountain. They don't get to laugh anymore. This is ours now. And it will be, long after their names have crumbled off the headstones. The applause rose, not polite, but thunderous, raw, real. It rolled through the gardens, rattled the windows, stirred the ghosts into quiet awe. Later that night, when the last lantern flickered out, I sat on the front steps alone. I pressed my palm to the warm stone, feeling the heartbeat of every mural, every poem, every whispered promise stitched into these walls. "You'll never be free of this family," my mother had said. She was right. But they would never be free of me either, or of the laughter that lived here now, or the murals that climbed the walls like wild roses that no hedge clippers could contain. I closed my eyes, breathed in the cool summer night, and heard the house sigh. Old, proud, unbowed. "Welcome home," it seemed to say. Welcome home. 2 more great stories are next. Don't miss them. Subscribe and turn on notifications.